moving on now to our second presentation, a study of the experiences of post-primary students with special educational needs in Ireland. Dr. Gary Squires comes from the University of Manchester. He's a senior lecturer in educational psychology. One of his roles is Programme Director of the Doctorate in Educational Psychology. He has worked with the British Dyslexia Association to develop dyslexia-friendly standards for local authorities. He also worked with the Audit Commission to develop the Value for Money toolkit for special educational needs. This research, commissioned by the NCSE, set out to capture the voices of students with special needs and to analyse their views. What do they value in teachers? What do they want of schools and of education? And for the grown-ups, what implications are there for schools? What are the key lessons for policymakers? Dr. Gary Squires.
Thanks, Johnny. So we were asked to explore the experience of post-primary students with special educational needs in Ireland. And we were asked, first of all, to do a literature review to see how that compared to the international literature. And the question that we were asked was a very broad question. It was to look at experiences that covered the experience of the curriculum, of teaching methods, supports, school climate, processes, structures, relationship with teachers and peers, and other issues at school. I think we managed to do that. And the report that we produced is quite lengthy because it includes many quotes from the students themselves. And the slides that I'm going to present now won't really do the voice of the students much justice because I'm just going to pull out the key points. So the next two slides will kind of give the context of the literature review. I'm then going to run through the methods, the findings, and lessons for policy and for schools. So, first thing that we were surprised by was that many of the issues for students without SEN and with SEN are very similar. And it includes access to further education is important for everybody, but those with SEN were more likely to seek employment or work-based education in the international literature. Qualifications and developing literacy skills were important in both groups. So it wasn't that one group favoured and the other group didn't. They all favoured it. The curriculum was seen to be relevant. Students without SEN valued a range of teaching approaches, not just more traditional academic approaches, and they particularly favoured activities that simulated real life. The most popular subject choices for students without SEN were sport, art, and creative subjects. While those with SEN, although they also chose the same subjects, tended to report very limited support in accessing sport. There were mixed results across the international literature for studies that looked at the success of supporting students in accessing the wider curriculum for students with SEN, and particularly around differentiation and around access to technical support. And in terms of inclusion, I think you see on the slide it says inclusion is not necessarily seen as a good thing, really because it was a mixed finding in the international literature that some studies showed that students preferred being in mainstream classes, while in other studies they preferred being in special classes. And in one study it kind of showed that some of the students went one way and some of the students went the other way. So the studies themselves were very mixed in terms of what they were finding. Autonomy and involvement in decision-making was valued. Friendships and support networks are important. Relationships with teachers are important. And students with SEN reported experience bullying more than their peers. So from bringing those points together, we came up with some lessons from literature. First of all, students' views should be obtained and taken seriously for a whole range of things, including educational placement, how support is provided and coordinated, the types of teaching methods which are used, how adult support is used in the classroom, and aspirations for education and employment. That students without SEN don't want to be marked out as being different to their peers. So this means that teachers need to explore how they can help students learn by removing barriers to learning and encouraging participation at the whole class or the whole school level, rather than just providing supports. And the key lesson from that really is that discussion with the student could help teachers to understand how individual support can best be arranged for that particular student and in ways which are less intrusive or obvious. And that really didn't surprise me, because from my own experience as an educational psychologist, we often had this kind of term, which you might have in Ireland as well, of talking about Velcro Kids. The idea that you have a teaching assistant who is Velcro to the side of you, and it gets in the way then of social development. You can't be naughty in class just like all the other kids can. You can't turn around and talk to your mates behind you. You get pushed back to pay attention. And equally, we found that whole school approaches to helping students form friendships should be developed, and schools need to put more emphasis on helping students with SEN form friendships. Okay, so our methods then for approaching this particular study. We wrote to 379 settings in all to try to get a sample, and we used a sampling frame which looked at the types of schools that were in Ireland, the geographical location, and the types of support that they would get. So our kind of approach went like this. We had an ideal sample in mind. We wanted to get 30 settings at the end of the day. From that, we split our sample into batches of schools, 10 at a time. We wrote to the principals of those schools and invited them to take part in the study. Most principals either deleted our email or ignored it, or one or two rang us up and said no thanks. So we managed to get one or two schools each time we contacted the schools out the batch. We kind of then arranged for consents, and those schools were then recruited and they became part of our sample. If our sample wasn't complete at that stage, we went round again and again and again until we ended up with all of the schools that we wanted. So we ensured that we had good geographical spread, and we ended up with 13 secondary schools, 9 vocational schools, 2 community schools, 1 comprehensive schools. That kind of mix was about the right proportion of types of schools in Ireland. We also had 3 special schools and 2 youth for each centres after discussion with the steering group with NCSE. And we made sure that schools varied in size, and again we as part of our sampling frame mix, so we had the right proportion of small schools, medium schools and large schools. We had a mix of rural and urban. We tried to get coverage of every county. However, some counties, no schools returned our emails. And we also included DESH and non-DESH schools. Now, we thought that was a really important approach to take because reading through the literature, we thought that the type and the way that the school was organised would make a difference to the experiences of the students. Having done the study, I think our assumption was wrong. Okay, and that's really because the students only get to experience the school that they are in. They don't get to make comparisons between the schools. So if I was doing the study again, I'd probably pay less importance on that. But it's quite nice to know that the study is representative in the sense of we got coverage of the types of schools. How do we set up the study itself? The diagram really shows us starting at kind of the bottom left-hand quadrant. Is we read through the details of the school to get some idea of the context. So we read through the school policy and documents. We wanted to have a feel for how the school was organised so that we could then tailor the questions that we were asking to that particular school. We then contacted the link teacher with each school and discussed how we thought the school was organised and got them to correct our understanding and to tell us a bit more about support arrangements and any processes that were in place. And we also had in mind an ideal sample of students that we'd like, and we asked what kinds of special educational needs were represented within that particular school and who might be likely to participate. Having identified the pupils themselves, we split our focus groups into cycle. So we had questions for the junior cycle, we had questions for the senior cycle that were slightly different. For example, For the junior cycle, we wanted to know about transition from primary school into secondary school. And from the senior cycle, we wanted to know about the transition year and transition into post-primary, post-secondary, I should say. When we met with the group of 3 to 4 students within each cycle, then we wanted to get an idea of what was going on, and we thought we might then be able to do some more in-depth interviews with just 1 or 2 pupils. In practice, that varied between settings, depending upon how many pupils we were able to recruit. And we also were able to make some casual observations going around the school, which kind of surprised us, because we went to one school and we'd asked the adults beforehand what they do, which is really helpful to include students, and they thought they couldn't really think of anything. And we asked the students within the school, and they really struggled as well. Yeah, what we saw was probably the most inclusive school we've ever been to, because what happened is people just naturally did things as they were needed. There was no real thinking about it, so it seemed that there was a good mindset in place that enabled people to support students as needed, which didn't really come through the interviews and through the discussions. We were a little bit worried about going to talk to students with special needs. We'd done another study a few years ago where we tried to do that. We tried to do it just by going and talking to students, and sometimes the students were very reticent and didn't say anything at all. And so we wanted to try and overcome that. So we went into a special school in Manchester, and we developed some key visuals. Key visuals are just very simple aids. They're there really to help overcome limitations of memory, to overcome limitations of language, and to provide attentional focus. All things which children with different types of SEN struggle with. So, for instance, we had some subject cards. We had some cards for situations. We had some cards for feelings. And we included rating scales, so children can make a response by turning the dial one way or another. And we also had whiteboards with us where we could put a topic or draw a picture, and equally children could respond in the same kind of way. And having trialled them with our special school, we felt really confident that these would help to get people talking when we came to Ireland. In most of the cases, when we're talking to students, we didn't need the key visuals. We found that students were very able to answer our questions and to talk. So quite a lot of the time, the key visuals were with us just in case we needed them. We didn't use them in every case. Some students had a lot to say. And they had a lot to say, and we had to interrupt them sometimes to change the topic and move on to get through the questions. Having been to Ireland a few times, I can see that there's certainly a cultural difference between how much people talk in Ireland and how much people talk in England, so that probably explains it, I think. One of the special schools we went to, one of the principal teacher there offered to help us with the students answering the questions. And as researchers, we were really suspicious about that because we thought that he would lead things in a particular way to make the school look very good. In practice, he was absolutely superb. And he encouraged the students to talk, and he structured it, and he reminded them of things that had happened last week, good and bad. So we got a very balanced view from those students. Okay, what did we find? There's quite a lot on here, but I'll go through it a bit at a time. The majority of students liked school. Okay, and that's great. We weren't expecting that. We were expecting it to be a bit more balanced. Those who changed settings, whichever direction they had gone in, if they'd gone from mainstream to special, if they'd gone from mainstream to youth reach, if they had gone, in one case, from special back to mainstream, they preferred the current setting, the one that they were in now, or at the time. They value teachers who care about them as individuals and treat them with respect. And there were lots of stories about really inspiring teachers who knew the students well, who genuinely cared for them. Equally, though, there were stories of teachers who made life hell for some students. So we kind of felt that we were getting some valid comments from the students. Post-primary settings were seen as being more flexible than primary. There are potentially many different arrangements for providing support that were talked about, which might not have been practical in primary settings. They felt it was important that schools reduce destructive behaviour that interferes with learning. Even children who said, well, I'm no angel, or I was no angel at that particular school, were still talking about how the school needed to try and reduce destructive behaviour. They talked about rewards that encourage positive behaviours as being valued, but with the caveat that they had to be attainable by all. So one or two students talked about the fact there was a reward system in the school, but for them it was meaningless because they couldn't do anything that would enable them to get the rewards. So they just ignored it. They talked about sanctions based on tariffs as being unfair. And the example that they gave was you can get thrown out of school for hitting someone with a chair or doing something which is really disruptive. On the other hand, you might be expelled if one minor thing leads to you getting one tick on the sheet, and another minor thing leads to the next tick on the sheet, another minor thing leads to a detention, and another minor thing leads to exclusion. So they saw that as really unfair because quite minor things ended up being major issues for them through exclusions and detentions. Equally, they talked about how peer pressure could undermine the school systems to manage behaviour. So they talked about really good school systems, it seemed, but then they said things like, but we get together, and a nice phrase they came out with, which you've probably all heard, which is, it's cool to break the rule. Okay, that came through from several students. When we looked at the curriculum, one of the things that came across was students reported having a choice of subjects was valued. When there wasn't a choice of subjects, they tended not to like that. Some of the mainstream students felt that the pace of the curriculum moved too quickly. In all three settings, mainstream, youth reach and special, there was an appreciation that a more relaxed pace was conducive to learning. And students certainly wanted to be involved in decision making around subject choices. When we came to talk about resource rooms, they were valued as places where mainstream students could receive more intensive support. They were also perceived by some students as providing emotional safety, so that kind of ties in with some of the things that we heard this morning. They didn't always help students who needed support in particular subjects, and students talked about there being a lack of subject expertise sometimes in resource rooms. And there was a lack of synergy between what happened in the resource room and what happened in mainstream classrooms. So you might have good teaching around skills in the resource room that didn't get carried into the mainstream classroom, it wasn't supported and generalised. Or you might have particularly good subject teaching happening in the mainstream classroom that never got followed up with supported teaching in the resource room. In terms of special classes, the views of special classes was very ambiguous. That some students felt they didn't promote inclusion for all students, and yet other students saw them as a way of helping them to be in mainstream classes for part of the time. Now, we only got to hear about one particular type of special class, which was a special class for autism, in a school where the children were partly in the special class and then partly in the mainstream. So it's a bit limited, and we wouldn't want to generalise too far on that, but certainly taking students' views into account, it's not straightforward that special classes are a good thing or not. When we asked some of the other children in the same school about the children in the special class who came into the mainstream class, they knew about them, but they weren't their friends, or they just talked about them coming into the class and not really being included. So it's more integration rather than inclusion. Additional teachers, when there are additional teachers, there needs to be good communication between the teachers. We heard about two teachers who were team teaching, and they were team teaching maths, and both used different techniques to solve the same problem. So one child asked one teacher, and they explained it one way, and they hadn't quite got it. And then they asked the other teacher, who explained it a completely different way, and they ended up being totally confused. So if there's team teaching taking place, it needs to be in a more coordinated way. Again, students didn't want to be singled out for support, They valued teachers who anticipated barriers and adjusted the teaching so that the students didn't need to ask for help. Students in the special schools and in some of the youth reach reported that transition from primary to post-primary had highlighted some inadequacies at either with the support they received at primary or reduced support in secondary. For example, one dyslexic student told us that he got support in primary and then he went to post-primary and there was no support available and he felt that he struggled. Another told us that support was easier to get in post-primary than primary, and that seemed to be due to the flexibility that you get from increased scale. In terms of social networks, they were seen to be important around the student. So good relationships with teachers was perceived as occurring when teachers were seen to be friendly, fair, knew the student well, fostered a sense of trust, and allowed difficult issues to be dealt with. There were, just an example, this is a quote from one student who said, "There were some teachers who really wanted to learn us and made it an adventure for learning. If every class was like my English class or like my business class, then I would have loved it. In my English class, we had to learn a book. My teacher read a page each day and really helped us learn it. It was a very sad book. At the end of every class, she had every girl in the class crying." So you can see the kind of passion that that teacher was instilling in the pupil, and she found that really helpful. Friendships were important, particularly beyond the boundaries of school, and that was more difficult for special school students just because of the geography of drawing in students from a large area. One of the special schools we went to, the staff were particularly creative, and the students told us about how they'd set up Skype and taught them how to use Skype so that when they went home, they could still talk to each other and so on. And examination pathway choices can be influenced by friendships and can also interfere with friendships. So there's some students who said that they didn't really like a particular subject, but they chose it because their friends chose it. And equally, others who said that they chose a particular subject because they liked the subject, but now they had no friends because all the friends had gone into a different subject. So thinking around how that might be managed is certainly a challenge. Okay. Impact on participation and engagement. The engagement was helped particularly by teachers who made school interesting, took an interest in the students, treated them with respect. Things that they might do in addition might be things like organising clubs. Students talked about those as being particularly beneficial. It's much more difficult in special schools to do that because of the transport arrangements. And the experience of the transition year was very ambiguous again, that some students liked it, some students wanted to avoid it altogether, and some students kind of had mixed views about whether it was a good thing or a bad thing for those schools that had the transition year. One of the things we found was that students in all the settings were ambitious and aspirational. They all wanted to do well. They viewed formal examinations as being helpful for future employment and further education. Those who were in Youth Reach emphasised the vocational aspects of the courses that they were following and the links that were being made with the world of work. School councils were viewed with ambivalence. Those who were on the school council, they liked it. They thought it was good. They thought it made a difference. Those who were not on the school council thought it didn't make a difference at all. So I guess where you're placed makes a difference. Across all the settings, bullying was mentioned, and they particularly valued strategies used by schools to tackle bullying. Special schools were felt to be safer by some students than mainstream schools. And for those who go on to Youth Reach, they talked about them as being safer than mainstream as well. So again, it may just be that smaller groupings make children feel safer. The findings of the study really echo the things that we found in the literature. So Ireland is not significantly different to anywhere else in that sense. That students like being involved in curriculum choices, they wanted their curriculum to be meaningful, they expressed a preference for practical subjects. They had a preference for assessment based on portfolio rather than written examinations. And one or two students just talked about the whole stress of doing too many examinations at the same time. I think that's not unique to children with SEN. The transition year, as we said, was not always valued, and that kind of contradicts a previous study which had found that the Irish students did value the transition year. So our study is kind of at odds with a previous one. But similar to previous studies, students felt that teachers in special schools and special classes were more supportive than those in mainstream classes. Some schools were able to use support flexibly to the benefit of students rather than rigidly to those who had the support assigned to them. And that SNA support that was too specific to the individual interfered with development of peer relationships. And again, that's similar to other studies that we have encountered before. Again, technological support seemed to improve engagement. There was a lot of expertise in the special schools that we visited that were using technological support, and that could well be translated into mainstream. Some of the students preferred more general support, such as a resource room. Some students in this study specifically wanted to attend smaller classes across different centres, and those students reported more confidence. Resource rooms allowed more opportunity to focus on skill development. However, there were not always good links, as we said before, between the small group teaching and the mainstream class teaching. And SNAs were able to work flexibly and beyond the care role to support more students with SEN. And I know that when I started the study, I kept mixing up TAs and SNAs, because in England the two terms are used synonymously. And I kept being told, no, SNAs are only there for care. But from what the students are telling me, they seem to have this dual role. So perhaps they're going a bit beyond just the care role. Again, school climate defined through relationships between members of the school community, the tone, attitudes of staff. As with most of the studies, most students have positive experiences of the current setting based on that. Students across all settings want to be treated with respect, and that echoes what we find in other studies. Those that were that talked about similarly poorer teachers in mainstream schools said that they were just too busy to support them, and that may be true. Similar to other studies, students value teachers who seem committed to engage with teaching and learning. And specific to this study, we found students didn't like teachers that they perceived as being unfair, overly rigid, insensitive to student needs. And in terms of the physical environment, that was also important for student engagement and inclusion. And we came across one school that was not well adapted for wheelchair use. And a student who had a wheelchair complained that they had to go out across the playground on a rainy day to use a toilet, for instance. But there's only one school. We also found that there's a tension in the way that SEN is defined. And the DES have the 14 categories, which are all well and good. But teachers used a much looser definition of what was meant by SEN. So one of the problems that we had was trying to work out, when teachers told us what kind of SEN the child had, which of the 14 categories it fitted, if any. That's not unique to Ireland, okay? And the same thing happens. We did a study in England. We had exactly the same problem, where we have different categories to those in Ireland. And I've been talking to students that I've been supervising and doing research in Saudi Arabia, and they talk about exactly the same thing. So I think there's a discord between categorization, which is used for administrative purposes, and teachers who are focusing on teaching and learning. In common with other studies, positive relationships with teachers was found to be important to students, and teachers were seen to be a key factor in student engagement. And similarly, peer relationships and friendships were seen to be important both in school and beyond school. And maintaining friendships from school and local community seemed easier for mainstream students than it does for special school students. So I kind of come now to, we were asked to write down some lessons that might be helpful. And these should be self-evident by now. So students should be at the centre of decisions made about them, actively involved in the process. School leaders need to consider how they create a culture and a climate in the school that is supportive of all students, especially those who are vulnerable or who have special educational needs. And it doesn't need to be a costly thing. A lot of that is about attitudes. And when different teachers are involved in teaching, they need to communicate well together. I guess the last slide really is that friendship development and maintenance is harder for some students with SEN. The schools that we went to, the students talked about lots and lots of things that those schools did, which were very positive in trying to help them to develop friendships. But those things happened when children appeared at the school for the first time from primary school, and nothing happened afterwards. So again, schools need to continue to explore how they use those strategies with those vulnerable students. Schools need to reflect on how they manage bullying in the school and pay particular attention to students with special educational needs. And then perhaps the last one is perhaps really one for maybe the DES to do, is to audit school buildings and just see if they need to be improved in any way. Okay, thank you.